Liberalism section, the depoliticization and naturalization of economic and social relations. Any expansion of the political was utterly intolerable to the liberal tradition, because it would involve relations that were not only private in character, but whose immutability was consecrated by nature or providence. In Burke's view, it was at once mad and blasphemous to believe that among, quote, the competence of government was supplying to the poor those necessaries which it has pleased the divine providence for a while to withhold from them. End quote. Poverty was the result of divine displeasure, and the latter could certainly not be placated by challenging, quote, the laws of commerce, which were the laws of nature, and consequently the laws of God. End quote. Some decades later, de Tocqueville argued no differently. On the eve of the 1848 revolution, he noted with concern the behavior of the, quote, working classes. They seemed calm, no longer, quote, bedeviled by political passions. Unfortunately, however, quote, where once they had been political, their passions have become social. End quote. Rather than the makeup of this or that ministry, they tended to question property relations themselves, and hence the natural order of society, tearing, quote, to shreds the basis on which it rests. When the revolution broke out, the French liberal regarded it as socialist, or infected with socialism, as early as February, because prominent in it were, quote, the economic and political theories, which would have people believe that human miseries are the work of the laws and not of providence, and that poverty can be abolished by changing the social order. End quote. Ranging beyond the political sphere, the, quote, threat of change in the social constitution was configured as an attack on the ancient, holy laws of property and family on which Christian civilization is based. End quote. Thus, on the one hand, political economy was merged with theology, while on the other it tended to take its place, in the sense that, quote, science was now called on to sanction and sanctify existing social relations. According to Malthus, it was wholly desirable that political economy be, quote, taught to the common people. Thanks to it, the poor would understand that they must attribute the cause of their privations to Mother Nature or their own improvidence. Indeed, quote, political economy is perhaps the only science of which it may be said that the ignorance of it is not merely a deprivation of good, but produces a great evil. End quote. But this was also the opinion of de Tocqueville, who believed it necessary, beginning of long quote, to diffuse among the working classes some of the most elementary and certain notions of political economy, which would make them understand, for example, what is constant and necessary in the economic laws that govern the wage rate. Because such laws, being in some sense of divine law, in that they derive from the nature of man and the very structure of society, are situated beyond the reach of revolutions. End quote. While for Burke, divine displeasure explained the misery of the popular masses, for Malthus it was the immorality of their behavior, the sexual incontinence that brought into the world beings whose subsistence people were not in a position to ensure. Referring to Malthus's principle of population, de Tocqueville reprehended, quote, all the excesses of intemperance widespread among the lower classes, their improvidence, or their tendency to live as if there will be no tomorrow, and above all, these early imprudent marriages that seem to have no other purpose than multiplying the number of unfortunates on earth. End quote. Notwithstanding the radical attitudes he liked to adopt, Bentham did not reach very different conclusions. Quote, with respect to poverty, it is not the work of the laws. The poor man was like a savage who had not succeeded in transcending the state of nature. End quote. Or to put it in the words of a French disciple and collaborator of the English philosopher, quote, poverty is not a result of the social order, so why rebuke it? It is a legacy of the state of nature." End quote. Arguing against natural law, the English philosopher waxed ironic about the recourse to nature to ground rights that only made sense in society. But now, nature popped up again to remove responsibility for poverty from the political social order. Given this elevation of existing social relations to the status of nature, and to nature sanctioned by providence, attempts to alter them could only be an expression of madness. Burke expressed his utter horror at revolutionaries or hasty reformists, who did not hesitate, quote, "to hack that aged parent, their country, in pieces, and put him into the kettle of magicians, in hopes that by their poisonous weeds and wild incantations they may regenerate the paternal constitution, and renovate their father's life." End quote. Similarly, for de Tocqueville, the illusion that there was a political, quote, "cure for this hereditary, incurable ill of poverty and work," provoked the incessant, ruinous experimentations that characterize the French Revolutionary cycle, or the, quote, "Great Social Revolution," begun in 1789. End section.